My question is for Steve Coll. Steve, how do you see an independent professional press remaining relevant in a context of media fragmentation, social media, polarisation on the basis of political and social beliefs, and increasingly blurred lines between news and opinion?
That's a good question. I think the most powerful answer is to keep doing investigative reporting that changes societies and that exposes corruption and causes ministers who are abusing their power to resign. That's the hardcore of journalism that distinguishes it from opinion and essay. It's reporting. It's about getting to the bottom of things, using public records, using interviews, accessing whistleblowers, being the court of last resort for people who have been failed by their institutions. Obviously the press in the United States is under assault by the president, who calls us enemies of the people, and it's created an atmosphere of incitement that is very disturbing. But at the
Has that accelerated the disintegration or the fragmentation that we're talking about?
It's actually strengthened the press. It's strengthened
certainly the New York Times. That's obviously
the Washington Post. It's strengthened students at Columbia Journalism School. Everybody has a sense of purpose. They know why we're in the public square and what our job is. And I think, for all of the attacks on the press in the U.S. And in some ways globally, we're in a renaissance of investigative reporting. Yeah. The Me Too movement wouldn't have happened without investigative reporting. Think about the abuses in the Catholic Church that required journalists because institutions failed, the prosecutors failed, the police failed, and journalism stepped in, listened, verified, published, and things changed. So that is where, and that credibility in our country, despite the polarization, which is very severe, it's working in red states as well as in blue states because people want power held to account. They want abuses stopped, and a free press is an indispensable part of that system.
Ben, what do you think?
I think it's a really good thing to bring up. I mean, the whole idea of Trump actually going out attacking the press, I mean, it really does feel like the first steps towards an autocratic regime. When you start calling journalists enemies of the state, I mean, that should send chills down your spine. But I guess Trump has said so many things by now. He's really kind of drilling complacency into people. And just building on what you've said before, in the Australian context, I think, we largely, I think surveys have shown that we largely distrust politicians, understandable. But there is sort of a growing distrust of the media in some quarters as well. But I would impress on you all that the media in Australia is diversifying and quite strong. And what happened with, say, Cardinal Pell wouldn't have happened if it weren't for journalists like Louise Milligan. We are lucky to have that mechanism here.
Steve, is it clearly going in the direction of strengthening the media? I mean, the digital platforms are obviously changing everything, but we do see with New York Times, which has become immeasurably strengthened in many respects, has moved into the digital space very cleverly.
Well, there's an enormous economic disruption that has damaged newsrooms across the country. It's most damaging in the heartland of the country, where voters are left without professional newsrooms reporting on their local governments, on their state capitals, where, I imagine there's a golden age of corruption that we don't even know about in some of these places. We have news deserts opening up in our country because of the collapse of the local news business model that used to be based in newspapers. On the coasts, at the national news outlets like the Times and the Post, the digital revolution has started to become rewarding. Subscribers are engaging and paying for the news, and those newsrooms are actually growing substantially. But it's unhealthy in that it's located on the two coasts and not in the heart of the country. There may be a way for local news organizations to copy some of the strategies that the Times and Post have succeeded with, but we're nowhere near stabilization, never mind growing back into strength.
Doré, how does this look to you? Black Lives Matter obviously requires public attention. How does the media play into the whole protest movement that grew up from the early days?
Yeah, so let me preface by saying I agree that the media is stronger and more important than it's been in a long time. I will say that the media was slow to call a spade, and Trump did a whole lot before they were like, this is racist. It's like the kids in cages wasn't racist. You're like, what does it take for you to be like, I think this is racism, And people really played. They played with Trump, and they let him get away with a lot before it really got serious. And I also think that they entertained this idea of both sides for a long time. So when Trump is like, you know, in Charlottesville, he's like, oh, it's good people on both sides. The news sort of just kept reporting that as like, oh, well, the president said it. And you're like, well, I think that the people with tiki torches, I don't think they were good guys. You know, like, I think that this is sort of an easy call to make. And now the press is like a little more hardline. So the ticker tapes on CNN are like, Trump is lying about these 5 things he's saying. And you're like, finally, you know, like, you knew that wasn't true, but it took him a long time to get there. And that is really, like, we can't not call that out. And I would fight with reporters all the time because they would do both sides around issues of race. But when somebody walked into a newsroom and killed newspaper people in Annapolis, when they somebody walked in and threatened newspaper people, killed them, the news didn't participate in both sides. They didn't. They didn't put anybody who believed that the news was the enemy. Those people weren't on TV. They weren't getting profiles. But the alt-right who believed in white supremacy, they were getting these full glamour shot features. And the reason that the news didn't have the people who walked into a newsroom and killed people on TV is that they understood that playing both sides for those people actually created dangerous environments. And it was sad that they did not have that same energy around issues of race. With the movement...
I was going to say, did the media get it when these protests started or got really big in Ferguson back in, I think, in 2014?
2014, yeah.
And you've got Obama as the president then. What happened? Did the media understand what this was all about, or was it such a confined area where it was happening that they didn't really see the core of it?
I think that in the States, the media is a little slow about race in general. So they were slow then. Thankfully, we had Twitter, and Twitter was really important to us. And if not for Twitter, Missouri would have tried to convince you that we didn't exist. We were in the street for a long time, for 400 days. And in the beginning...
Tell us how many people we're talking about, because these were big protests.
Yeah. So
and they were violent from the police perspective. I mean, the police used armoured vehicles. They used tear gas.
The police were violent.
Yeah,
we were
no, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, I was like, we weren't violent. The police were violent. The police were violent. Is that we were only in the street because the police killed people. We were in the street for 400 days. It was a long 400 days. But again, if not for Twitter, Missouri would have convinced you that we didn't exist. They declared a no-fly zone almost immediately over Missouri, so you didn't see any aerial footage of those protests. They killed Mike Brown on August 9th, and 10 people very quickly thereafter. They killed another kid 9 days later. You know, it was really wild. And we think about the issue in the States, a third of all the people killed by a stranger in the United States is actually killed by a police officer. So it is bad. And people say to me all the time, why am I making this about race? And I remind them that race is making this about me, that I didn't do this, right? That we're in the street because we had to be. But with Twitter, it was really important. And you think about 2014, it feels like so long ago, is that in 2014, there was no Twitter video, there was no live streaming, there was no Periscope, there was no Facebook Live. Like, we were literally using Vine and making these 6-second video clips and putting them on the internet. You know, like, that was how we mobilized thousands of people. But the media sort of picked up, and I'll tell you, you know, Don Lemon, who is on CNN, there were a lot of reporters who said we were being dramatic. They're like, you know, you're being dramatic about the tear gas, and then they got tear gassed. And it was great because it was like, well, told you they were tear gassing people, and you thought we were being dramatic. And, you know, the day Don Lemon got tear gassed, it was one of those, like, we tried to tell you they were tear gassing people and didn't care. And it was like, it took that. You know, you think about Chris Hayes, his show started right when the protest started. And in St. Louis, it was illegal to stand still in August, September, and October. If we stood still for more...
Illegal to stand still, meaning when you're in the street, you have to keep moving all the time.
All the time. So if you saw us marching, it wasn't that we thought marching was cool, we had to. And if you stood still for more than 5 seconds, you were arrested, and everybody. So the reporters, we forced the reporters to walk too. The police would let the reporters stand still, and we're like, nope, if we out here, y'all out here. And I'll never forget Chris Hayes in his early in his career, you know, he was out there. And I remember somebody going up to him and cussing him out, being like, you don't get to write about us and not walk, because we had to walk all day long and all night. And it really was that energy that changed everything. You know, this is the first year ever in the country where Black people are more afraid of being killed by a police officer than being killed by community violence. And the police have actually killed more people since the protest, not less. So it has been a hard going, but the media was slow.
I just want to have one other sort of key question for you about this, because we were talking about the kind of violence of society generally, about racism and the pressure that it puts people under. And I'm thinking about you at the core of this demonstration. And the death threats started very early. Have they kept going? How many death threats have you had? And what is your life like, having to live with this constant fear that someone's going to kill you?
Try not to count them, don't do that. But You know, a movie theater was evacuated because somebody said they were going to kill me. The first person ever permanently banned from Twitter was banned for raising money to try and get me killed. My phone got hacked. So just like Jack Dorsey's, if you saw Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, his Twitter account got hacked. It was a SIM swap. So somebody called, the same thing happened to me. Somebody called Verizon, the phone company, posed as me. My social security number was dumped on the internet. They got my SIM card changed over the phone, which I didn't even know you could do. And they reset all my passwords and logged into the account. I've been sued by 5 police officers in 2 states. And I have 1 pending case at the Fifth Circuit because they are saying that this officer got hit by a rock one night where I was outside, and they're saying that I can be held civilly responsible for that. Now, I say all this to say that, like, the reason I still do this is I think we'll win, and I know that those people want us to be too afraid to do the work. Like, the goal is to make us too afraid to come outside again. But again, 1/3 of all the people killed by a stray in the United States is killed by a police officer. That is wild. Like, that should shock people. That is like a wild thing, you know? So we spend a lot of time on the laws. Like in California, there's a law that says that any investigation of an officer that lasts more than a year can never result in discipline regardless of the outcome. Those things don't make sense.